Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where I'm still here at the Adobe Summit in Las Vegas, where Joan Smith was on a panel discussing the new Playbook and how thriving in uncertainty is rapidly becoming the new normal. And this got me thinking, uncertainty might be the new normal, but with uncertainty also comes opportunity. So the big question for me is, how can leaders and marketers who continue to face so many challenges with continued shifts in balance between digital and physical and independence of supply chains, increased data privacy regulation and homebody economics that are impacting consumer behaviour, combined with that added wrinkle of looming economic downturn, how can they thrive when we combine all of these things? Now, the reality is that it's critical to connect technology to customer value. That's how we can orchestrate value strategies that better drive growth and build innovative agility into the fabric of operating models. So, inspired by this conversation, I asked Joan to join me on the podcast for a quick chat about things like customer expectations in an economic downturn and the impact of meaningful experiences, connecting technology to customer value, and orchestrating purposeful interactions that create hyper-personalization, and also things like embedding agility and automation into operating principles to navigate constant change, and so much more. And she is the perfect guest to speak with because Joan Smith is the Managing Director and leader of Protiviti Digital, which includes things like strategy, transformation, customer experience, creative technology, and so much more. But I've probably revealed far too much already. So buckle up and hold on tight, because it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to Las Vegas so you can sit down with me and Joan here on the show floor at the Adobe Summit. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Joan Smith and I lead Protiviti Digital globally. And we are a professional services firm, a mixture of a digital consultancy and agency. And we've recently merged with another digital agency named R2I. R2 Integrated, and we focus very much on the experience space, digital experiences, and very much on Adobe.
Now, before we begin, a question I've got to ask is Protiviti. Where did the name come from? Is there a story behind that name? I feel there has to be, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a fun little name. When the founders formed the company about 20 years ago, they spent some time looking at the values that they wanted to bring out in the culture of what they were going to build, and positive and family and innovation came to mind, and so they mashed a bunch of words together before it was really cool to do that, and came up with Protiviti. And we often laugh and call it around positivity because it's a big part of our culture.
Awesome. And I think you guys were ahead of your time there in messing those words up, looking at some of the startups and missing vowels and things now. But of course, we're talking today live at the Adobe Summit, and this is the first in-person event for, I think, 4 years now. So what have you enjoyed most about talking to people in person on a show floor again?
It has been amazing. And I've heard words like high school reunion and, old friends, old colleagues. I think everybody has missed seeing each other in person. I've heard so many stories of people who've been working together over the past couple of years, but this is the first time they're actually meeting live. So there's a lot of firsts of people actually making those connections. And I think that's been sort of the biggest thing. And the things we used to remember to do, or that really is the benefit of a human connection, where you connect with somebody and you have somebody else in the conversation. It's very ad hoc and spontaneous, and ideas start flying. And it's a little bit less, a little bit more purposeful in our world, where we're on screens of glass with each other most of the time.
And I think those virtual events, they did serve a purpose for that time, but you cannot replicate having all those different perspectives in a room and thinking and talking about things that you wouldn't normally come across, right?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I'll share. I've seen a few of these where somebody's talking to somebody, they're talking about something, and they immediately just walk across the floor, grab somebody else that they know who can have a perspective on that conversation, and in the moment, you're innovating and creating, and it's just not that easy it's more purposeful when we're on our digital devices.
I absolutely love those moments of serendipity when you get that. I know somebody here that can help you with that can talk about that. It's just something magical in that, isn't it? But obviously, you've been here talking about the new playbook and thriving in uncertainty and how that is the new normal here at the summit. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and what you've been talking about?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the fact that, the last few years have been a whirlwind for all of us. The world's a little topsy-turvy, and we all feel that in our personal lives. We feel it in our business lives, too. And I think we all expected that. I think early on, we're going to go back to normal. I don't think there is a back to normal. The new normal is whatever is going to happen in the next, and we don't know what's coming around that next corner, but there's going to be something. And so how do you think about operating in a world where you have to be adaptable and flexible? You are busy. Talent is worn out and tired. It's hard to find. There isn't enough talent, especially in our Adobe world. There's not enough. And you need to keep your head up and look for the signals of the changing behavior or the next disruption or whatever's going to happen coming your way. And what is that playbook of things that you should be doing to help yourself adapt and operate more agile?
One of the things I've loved about being here at the summit is no TVs. Even though there's 2 or 3 TVs in our rooms, I've not switched it on. And being away from things like economic uncertainty and global conflict, it's kind of good for the soul, isn't it?
It is nice to step away for a minute and just be and think about innovating and think about where you want to go. So I think a lot of the folks here are focused on their future, right? They're focused on what they're trying to accomplish, not necessarily being maybe paying attention to what's that other side of it.
Yeah. Well, just to set the scene for today's conversation, can you tell me a little bit more about the customer expectations during this period of economic downturn and also the impact of meaningful experiences? Because it's still more important than ever, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, we don't stop being consumers. We still believe we can click a button and, we still do. We click buttons in order to order cars, or we pull up and our groceries are delivered to us outside of an establishment or whatnot. That doesn't change even in an economic downturn. And so the brands we love and that we do business with and to get our products and services still need to be able to provide us experiences that are valuable and that feel like they're relevant to what we're looking for. However, in an economic downturn, our often discretionary income is tighter, and there's lots of competition looking for our dollars. And so disappointing us and missing experiences has a higher threshold. It becomes more important to make sure that the experiences you do give are fitting of your brand. Otherwise, we may go elsewhere because the need to move, and because we're all stressed, right? And everybody's stressed at all points. So those experiences become more important to actually, your dollars have more power.
And as this is a tech podcast, the question I've got to ask is, if you can expand a little about connecting technology to customer value, especially viewing it in terms of customer experience, rather than just a customer process, which feels almost soulless, doesn't it, saying that?
Yeah, and if you think about the words process, right, customer process, it has a linear feel to it. For those of us in business, right, we see it linearly, we think about it that way, and it's really not that way. It can come from all different directions, and it's a little bit more of a rabbit's net or a nest. And so when we think about that customer value, or what are those moments in an interaction that are meaningful and that have the most impact on your experience with that, and making sure you get those right, and don't try to don't engineer around a process around that you've engineered of the customer does A, B, C, D, because the customer doesn't necessarily always do that. They come in from lots of different angles. Make sure you've identified what are the moments that really are impactful, get those 100% right, and then pay attention to the signals of what your customer is telling you the journey should be.
Yeah, 100% with you on that. And I've got to ask this, what is the secret? I appreciate this is a pretty big question, but what is the secret to orchestrating the purposeful interactions that create things like hyper-personalization, but without being creepy or intrusive by privacy-focused customers? Because it is such a fine balance, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And with customers across a lot of things, we all demand, we want things to be relevant. And I think in a lot of cases, we want them to be personalized. We want you to know, we want a company to know that we've been there before and just be relevant to us. So it's very important that we as business leaders start thinking about how do we make sure we're transparent and that we're getting a gauge on where are the levels to which our different audiences want to be communicated and what kind of personalization do they want? Because you might have some audiences that want it, some audiences that want less, so that you're walking that line between relevance and the creepy part.
Yeah.
And it's really getting the most out of your technology. Your technology today is, and especially since we're here at Adobe, can do that. It can help you, but you have to be paying attention to those data signals, and you should be transparent and asking, what do your customers want?
And I'm curious, because I always sympathize with brands that are struggling to get that balance right, because on one hand, we all want that personalization. We want those better experiences, but equally, without transparency on how our data is being used, we do often, creepy is a wrong word, but we've all been on the internet and seen that table and chairs that follow us on every single website we go on. But is this something very real for brands? Because it's very difficult to meet those expectations, isn't it?
Yes, and so a lot of brands, there are two things I think. We tend to use our newer technologies, even if we've got the new technologies, sometimes we use them the same way we used our old technologies. And that might be part of it, is taking a look at what can the new technology do to make that easier for us. And then the second piece is actually sort of breaking down some of those silos within our organizations or working across them to make sure that we actually are being transparent, that we're getting the data that we need, and that we're watching those signals.
And how do you think brands can get better at embedding things like agility and automation into their operating principles to navigate this world of constant change? Because if we go back 4 months ago, nobody knew what ChatGPT is or generative AI, but here we are, that's all anybody's talking about in just 4 months. So we are in a world of constant change, but is there anything you can share around that?
And I think even here, I've seen 4 or 5 demos with ChatGPT already integrated into them, right? So this is moving very, very fast. And I think organizations, they need to be thinking about how do you weave innovation into the fabric of how you operate. So don't think about innovation as a thing that sits over on the side. It needs to be part of how you're actually operating, breaking down those silos, bringing together teams, whether that be you reorganize or whether that be you just bring together teams across your tech people and your marketing people and your various experienced folks and bring together that cross-functional and start to look at what could we do, what are the use cases that matter for us, and start testing them out and test them and see, does that make any sense? Does it move the needle for us? Is it valuable? And if not, put that technology aside and move on to the next thing. It gives you a feeling of agility, and if you're always focused on what are the use cases and what are the things your customers are looking for, then you're always focused on the right North Star. Not every new thing is going to solve for everybody's problems.
And as someone that spent a lot of time on the show floor here, had a lot of conversations, soaking up those different perspectives, are there any particular trends in the kind of conversations you're having here? Because we'll have people listening all over the world that can't be here. I'm just curious if you could share any of those conversations that you've been having around those trends.
Yeah, we've got a lot of different trends have come up, and very much content is a big one. People are dealing with more content. They're trying to orchestrate it. Content supply chain is a word that's being moved around now. But if, those of us a little bit more old timers, we may think about it as content operations or managing your content. Actually figuring out how do you put as much content as you need in the places where your consumers or customers are looking for them. And then how do you make sure that content is trusted, it's authentic, and it's actually served up in the personalized way. That's one big theme that's come up. The other is connecting the data and the data pieces, because that's your hub of everything, is being able to get those right signals that help you to make the right decisions and about what content you're serving up.
And what about yourselves? What excites you about the future, and what will you be thinking about on that plane ride home? Because there's so much to soak up here, and you don't really appreciate it until you leave, and then you suddenly start thinking about those conversations. But what will you be thinking about on that plane home?
Yeah, so I am very, very excited by the folks that I've met here on the floor, the the different brands and what they're looking to accomplish this year. There's some real energy around and some seriousness around really trying to do some things differently. So for me, I'm going to be reflecting on some of those amazing people I've met, some of the great partnership conversations I've had. That's probably the other big thing across. There's so many technologies that integrate with Adobe, and so many different things come together to solve different problems. And we've met so many great partners as well about how do you put together solutions that solve specific problems for the clients that we're interacting with.
And once you're back in the office, you're back on top of your email after all those leads that you've connected with. I don't know how much you can share about this, but what's going to be your big focus as a company this year? What are you going to be concentrating on?
Yeah, so we are very much this year focused on really amping up our Adobe work and support of folks who are working through specifically on the AEM and connecting that into the CDPs and their data elements, helping them really think about how do you make sure that content is flowing appropriately and that they've got the right thinking. We also are part of our larger organization has a very risk and compliance perspective. And as we look at the world becoming more and more risky these days, tying in how do you make sure your content is appropriate, it's honest, it's memorable, it's usable, all of those pieces, and that it's compliant and trustworthy.
So I'm conscious if we will have people listening around the world that are hearing about you and what services you offer for the first time, are there any use cases or client stories you could share that would just help people understand the kind of problems that you solve and how it might impact their world too?
Yeah. We solve a variety of problems, but a couple, use case that comes to mind, one recent client and their current client in the high-tech space have done a lot of acquisitions over the last several years, like many companies have. They've got a house of brands now, and they've got traffic coming to all kinds of different sites. And so they're looking to really understand what is the crossover between those. How do they better utilize their technology because they're managing multiple levels of challenge? You've got technical debt across multiple sites. You've got traffic coming to many sites. You've got different experiences on many sites. So as we move them onto the Adobe platform and brought together component libraries and different elements that made all those sites work as one with one backbone. So the management and the technical data of it is much slicker and sleeker. And then all the front ends, you're now tracking all of the traffic in the right way. Your experiences are consistent while still maintaining brand differentiation. And then we started working on taking it from there and moving into how do we help them drive better traffic? How do we help them then connect into their data elements and become more hyper-personalized? And then added in some AI components that enabled the teams to actually operate a little more efficiently.
Well, it is such a hot topic at the moment, so I have a feeling you're going to be incredibly busy. And for anyone listening, just want to find out more information about what you do, maybe even contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
The web is always the best starting point. So digital.protiviti.com or r2integrated.com would be the other one to use. And just reach out and we'd love to come and have a conversation with anybody.
Awesome. Well, I'll add those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. Love chatting with you about so many different things there, especially in this period of economic uncertainty and how brands can thrive and the reality that it is critical to connect technology to things like customer value, orchestrating value-based strategies that ultimately drive growth, build innovative agility right into the fabric of their operating model. But just a big thank you for taking the time to share that with me today.
Thank you so much. I've appreciated it. Great to meet you.
Well, gang, that brings us to the end of another insightful and thought-provoking episode of this podcast here in Las Vegas. And I want to extend a massive thank you to Joan Smith for joining me today. She was back-to-back with meetings and she was on the panel. So taking time out to share her expertise on how businesses can thrive in uncertainty, adapt to the new normal, and how it's clear that now more than ever, leaders and marketers need to embrace change and the role that technology can play. And I cannot thank her enough for coming on and sharing her insights. And again, I hope our conversation today has inspired and empowered you to take on the challenge of creating things like meaningful experiences, connecting technology to customer value and orchestrating hyper-personalized interactions. I hope this conversation might have stimulated some thought there on how you can better navigate innovation and create resilience and of course, adaptability. I think Those three things, innovation, resilience, and adaptability, are the most important traits right now. But if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe. You can leave us a review and listen wherever you listen. And I also truly appreciate your support, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on not only the topics we discussed, but on other things that you'd like to hear too. So I'm going to sign off for my time here at the Adobe Summit in Vegas, but just a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.